Welcome to our second episode of our second season. This season we're reading horror books, and today we are talking about The Rats by James Herbert. As always, I just want to say the opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the participants and do not reflect the opinions and beliefs of Marshall University Libraries, the Department of English, the College of Liberal Arts, or HerdCon.
And as I like to add, we're grateful that they employ us. So, but yeah, have to put that disclaimer in. So, yeah, just to give you a little bio information about James Herbert. He's an English author. Before he became a best-selling author, James Herbert worked in the art department of the John Collins ad agency. While he was at that job, one of the things that he noted was that there was a lot of everybody in the ad agency was like a frustrated novelist, and so he was in the art department, and he wrote a novel. He wrote The Rats, and it got published in 1974. Was a huge bestseller, and that kind of sent him on his way in the horror genre. He ended up writing 14 novels in the that were horror or thriller based, and went on to sell over 41 million copies over his career. So extraordinarily successful author. His work was a huge influence on the explosion of horror novels in the 1970s and 1980s. He's one of the authors that is mentioned and talked about in Grady Hendrix's Paperbacks from Hell. If you like horror, I definitely suggest you check that out. And sadly, he died unexpectedly in March 2013. And The Rats is part of a trilogy of rat-based horror novels. And the second one being The Lair, and the third one being Domain. The first novel is a little under 200 pages. The Lair is about 200 and close to 280. And then the final one is a whopping 482 pages. So it is escalating, more rat carnage and more rat devastation, which I kind of think how I've not read these novels, but I'm amazed how much it could scale up after reading this novel.
I also just want to throw in a trigger warning. If you love old people, babies, women, gay guys, or any form of animal whatsoever, it might not be the book for you. But it's a good book.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely hits. It's a compendium of fears, all the things, disease, pestilence, claustrophobia, darkness, and I think it does that thing in horror where I always think of like speculative fiction as horror is a little on the more, if this was just one thing out of whack, what would that cause? So like, what if rats were much larger than that? Like they were the size of small dogs. If they were like 2 feet tall, then what sort of havoc would they wreak on the world if the rats were bigger? So we get a good taste of that in this novel for sure.
Yeah, especially rats hold to their truth and carry plague in this novel. It's also one bite and you're dead.
Yeah.
And we really see that come in. That does bring me to my one complaint about the book. The extreme graphic didn't bother me, nothing like that. But I felt like the end was very rushed. Mm-hmm. We know the main character gets bit, gets his earlobe ripped off.
Loses some fingers. Yeah.
And then
spoiler alert.
There's just like a small section where he's like, it's a good thing I have those vaccines to save me. Mm-hmm. And I found myself saying, what vaccines? When was this ever discussed that we now have vaccines for this virus?
Yeah, I mean,
I was confused.
It feels like it was I guess it was an early iteration of Project Warp Speed, that they had figured out something, and I think also it kind of says in the novel that when they try to get the virus to the rats, there was a whole thing where trigger warning, they feed little puppies to the rats who were infected with the virus that will then therefore kill the rats. That somehow weakened their viral protection. Like somebody could actually survive it if they were good and healthy. So yeah, I do think it's often with I find it's with a lot of genre work, particularly something that's short, that it builds and builds, and then there's this kind of wrap up that kind of it's there like once the immediate threat is gone. There's maybe a little mention or a little something to set up what may come. But yeah, it's a pot boiler. Don't worry about too many having everything be explained.
Yeah, definitely don't expect that, but I still enjoyed it. Even though as I was reading, I was like, wouldn't it be cooler if, like, because his ear got ripped off, the infection didn't get into him? Instead of throwing, like, this random line about vaccines in. I really felt like James Herbert was like, I don't want Harris to die, but how do I get him bit without biting?
But I want him to be punished for trying to do the right thing or being a little too much of a hero at that point.
I was irritated with him. I was like, why do you feel this need to go save this man? Which brings me to Foskins. He is like the Department of Health leader. He gets fired publicly, but then he says they didn't actually fire him. It was just for show. But how do you feel about him? I was wondering, like, is he an anti-hero? Is he bad? Did he just fall to his own hubris? Like, what was Foskins? Obviously, government ineffectiveness.
Yeah.
Not really caring, all of those things. But him as a character.
I mean, he's very much got that. He's the undersecretary, so it's something that feels like it's important, but it's below. it's this kind of underling. He's kind of in the middle management area, and he's a real good example of someone declaring mission accomplished way too early, multiple times. You figure he would learn by then. Because, in the novel, we get basically three waves of rat attacks. And each one gets more and more intense afterwards. Like, literally, they're just like rivers of giant rats circulating through London at the end, like they're torrents and floods.
I think he said it was 50 yards wide and there was no gaps in between them.
Yeah, 50 yards of rat everywhere and, several deep. And anyway, he seems like he's one of the, he's an administrator. He's in the bureaucracy. He likes to take the credit. And, when often it is a team of people who do that. We often see the leader. He wants to be some sort of like leader, but he's not giving really credit to everybody. The people that actually think of these things up to try to fight. Which helps initially and then backfires a lot.
I will say he got a lot of my respect even as the character that he is. I cannot remember the man's name, the man that's even under him, the young scientist.
Howard.
Howard, yes.
It's such a hero's name, Howard.
He confronts Foskins and, he says, you took all of the glory, you can take all the blame. And Foskins immediately admits that it's true. And that he understands, and so I really appreciated that in the end he did take that accountability, and he paid for it.
Yeah, and a lot of it feels like towards the end of they find out what the source is, what they think might be the source, and where the nest of these giant rats are, and what horrifying things will they find there, and he seems like, because also this is Foskins' responsibility of his action or premature celebration has killed a lot of people and created a false sense of security. So there's certainly, it's this kind of his attempt is tragic in that he's trying to stop things, but it also seems kind of a passive suicide at the end, like he's going to die because of, he's done so much damage that he has to find a way to try to do something. But if he dies in the process, he seems...
And we know he actually got fired that time.
Yeah.
He really did give.
Yeah.
My stomach dropped at the end of the celebration when I read, and all was peaceful for now.
For now, yeah.
That is how that chapter ends, so it's very foreboding.
Yeah. I mean, as a story, we think about stories that have rising actions and falling actions, and this kind of comes like a roller coaster. It comes in waves. It's there's the first wave and it dies down, and then it comes back, and then it comes back even stronger every time. I can't help but get COVID anxiety from this. It's okay, we've hit the peak, and now we're flattening the curve, and oh nope, it's back again, and then it's back up again, and that false sense of security. But I mean, this happens with diseases. This happens with various threats. It's just something that we can never completely eliminate anything, and so therefore. It's just going to be a thing that we deal with.
Absolutely. And I've got to say, I loved the siege at the school.
Oh, yeah.
If this book, if it were going to follow Harris the whole series, I think that would have made a perfect ending point to it because I was so tense the entire time. You know, I love zombies, so having a school sieged by one bite and you're dead kind of creatures,
Yeah.
really fulfilling for me.
Yeah.
But then there was only one death in the whole scene, other than rats, obviously.
Yeah, you know, it is. We see at different points like transportation get attacked, education, or the movie theater, so art, and so these like institutions that are being attacked and and then how there's certainly a very kind of it's very British, it's like keep calm, stay calm, and carry on. That is there, and so there is this sense of like we must protect the children. Although there are plenty of kids and babies and things like that get eaten, but I think it just in that way the horror of like it taking down a whole school. It's something that's perhaps it's kind of interesting. Like this is a very graphic book, and lots of characters die very, very badly. But it seems like that kind of what the school represents seems to be like something that is precious and that you want to protect. Just the institution of it.
The children are our future.
Yes, the children are our future, and we just need to flood it and gas it and all those things.
But don't worry, the gas doesn't work on humans unless you do a whole lot of it.
Yeah, unless you're just in a really confined space, which, there's a lot of confined spaces in that. So,
I think the ending for me was just very irritating altogether. I will say that. I really loved the book until the end because I felt like Harris started making silly mistakes.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean you went into the lair and you forgot to put on your helmet? Like, it just seemed like they started doing silly things that Harris wouldn't have done.
Yeah, I feel like as a story, I think to me, narratively and tension-wise, it kind of peaks with the school attack and the subway attack.
Yes,
and that it is like there's this whole plan. We're going to use high intensity frequencies to corral them, and then we're going to really poison them, the rats, and that suddenly he feels impaled. Like life is good. He's in the bunker. His girlfriend Jude is working. He's got it all figured out, but then he's like he can't help himself. He can't help but try to be a hero, and that's where he gets punished for his kind of hubris in that moment.
I was really hoping the rats would attack where their headquarters were because I think that would have been incredibly intense.
Yeah,
because he finally would have had that moment where he really has to protect Judy, or not.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little passage where they're encouraging everyone to evacuate from London, and some people are like, I'm not scared of this vermin. That there is this kind of, I think it's a very class conscious commentary that there are people here in this city where hundreds, thousands of people have been consumed by rats, and they don't have any direct sense of being attacked by a rat. So they're like, I'm just going to stay in my house because this is where I don't want to be looted. I'm in a privileged situation because I'm in a nicer part of town, kind of thing.
Sure.
And you see that sort of consciousness about it. It's the people who are on the outs, the working class, the poor, the unhoused. These are the people that initially get attacked in it.
Do you know I know the book was published in 1974. Is the book also set in 1974?
I think my sense is it's around that time.
Okay.
Or whatnot.
Because they were talking about those bombed out buildings. And so I was like, okay, is this 3 years after the war? But it being 30 years after the war, I think has a lot more of an impact on what do you mean there's still bomb sites?
Yeah. I mean, this is something in a lot of European countries. There were ruins and damage from World War I, which was called the Great War at the time because they didn't know there was going to be a sequel. As
the war to end all wars.
Yeah, the war to end all wars. And there was after that there were still damaged places. And in a lot of way, England, Great Britain's last big hurrah was helping to win World War II. And, in the aftermath, there was a depression and economy collapse. So there was a lot of economic struggles for many decades in England afterwards. Things were bombed out, industries. So it took them a long time to recover. I think generally, around by the 90s, things started to get a little better. You had things like Thatcher come in, bringing in austerity. But it was a rough kind of time. Having a job, it was good to have a job. There was just a lot of, England was very drab and sad, and
Sure.
You had to live. Most adults when they were working, they had to live with family and things like that. So it is a stifling kind of existence, and we see a character like Harris who becomes an art teacher again, much like an artist, much like the novelist himself. But he wants to stick around where he grew up in East London, a more poor side of town, and kind of look after the place and kind of help others out of that. But yeah, it is not it's not a gleaming city on the hill at this point. There's obviously economic distress everywhere.
Yeah, for sure. And it's almost like saying it's going to be the artists that save the world.
Yeah.
Not the military. They're pretty inefficient other than protecting the artist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting that it seems like to almost to what extent it's more Harris, the guy who lived on the East Side, as opposed to Harris, the artist, because we don't really get a great, other than being an art teacher that is sarcastic and it does care about his students, however annoying they are and cheeky they might be.
Middle schoolers, I think.
Yeah. They're the worst. I know because I was the worst when I was in middle school. In your middle school, you're just terrible.
It's the start of puberty.
Everything's a joke. It's like Louis XIV's court, where you're just trying to diss as many people as you can so people don't talk about you.
It's true.
And and it's a rough, getting kids to care about these things. But he sees potential in kids. If he was like an uncaring teacher, he would be a lot less sympathetic. I do think he's kind of idealized, but there's never something where he uses art to help with.
No.
But it's his knowledge of where he grew up.
And I really did like that class solidarity because, you have several times, even Judy begs him, you can go teach at a nicer school. The places are begging for him now that London's been removed. And as somebody from Appalachia, from a poor town, from a poor state, I really so much appreciated and could relate to that. No, these are my people.
Yeah.
No one else is going to care about them the way I care about them. You think the government cares? If the government cared, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Yeah.
And something about that just really made Harris to me just really stand out. I really enjoyed that despite, he had gotten above his raisin and all of that. And yet he's still true to the people. He remembers where he came from.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, even though he lives in, I think, Charing Cross, he lives in a nice place, but then he just takes the tube over to, I think spacing has it. I mean, London is a big city, but it's something you can go from the nicer places to the more poverty-stricken places quite easily. And so it's something he doesn't forget, even though he does admit at one point that, even though he's considered middle class now, the pay isn't that good for being a teacher. So he's like, it's really has more to do with accents than wages. So he is educated, but he's also not necessarily wealthy by any stretch of the imagination being an art teacher.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah, and I think they probably on average probably got paid better than we do in America.
For sure.
Some European countries generally respect the teaching profession more, but it's still we probably could earn a little more money. Yeah.
Drawing parallels to today, I don't know if this was a problem in '74, but how the rats got there, being brought from an exotic country in. I really see those parallels to exotic animals in our country today, with like boa constrictors destroying the Everglades.
Yeah.
So I really think that you can read that book. This book is still holding up. We're
Yeah.
still fighting these same battles, even if now they're highlighting new battles that maybe James Herbert didn't know that we would face one day.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there is, and I think you see that in films and like The Frogs, Night of the Lepus, which is if you've ever heard of Night, it's about giant rabbits that wreak havoc. It's based off of a H.G. Wells novel. That these threats, environmental threats and monster threats are not necessarily like your Godzilla, your big, huge monsters, but what if there were a multitude of smaller monsters, and just how threatening and dangerous that is, and how it overwhelms an environment and comes to dominate it. One of the little factoids I remember reading, it was about, I think it was, I can't remember his name. He's the astronomer.
Nostradamus?
No, not Nostradamus. He's African American. He does Star Talk, and anyway.
Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Neil deGrasse Tyson, yeah. Neil deGrasse Tyson had talked something about, what would be like for long-term space travel, what would be the best food source to use. And like if you needed to raise stuff as you're traveling across to the next star system or something, if we ever got to that point, which that's an option and not a necessity at this point. And things like cattle, you need 4 calories of energy to get 1 calorie of food out of cattle. For chickens, it's something like 3 calories of energy to get 1 calorie of food. But with rats, for every 4 calories of energy, you get 3 calories of food. So they're very efficient as far as like when they eat something, it becomes weight on them. So oddly, something like eating rat would be the most food efficient, but also they are efficient in how whatever they eat becomes rat, so to speak. So this is a creature who's very efficient in making more of itself, but making itself from a limited amount, a much smaller amount of fuel and food to get. So this is why you have these rats getting very big and huge and multiplying very quickly, because they don't need as much fuel as, say, we do, or cows or chickens or things like that.
Also, let me say, as a cat lover, I felt there were so shockingly, other than big cats, I don't remember there being any house cats. And I wondered if James Herbert was also a cat person, and he was hearkening back to the bubonic plague where they killed the cats, but then the cats couldn't kill the rats that were spreading the plague.
Yeah. But then what happens when the rats become like cats and there are just way too many of them? You
just have to domesticate them. We've done it before.
Yeah. But yeah, and I think also you're kind of right. There's also the zoo scene. I'd forgotten about that. I wish I hadn't forgotten about it.
I wish I could forget about it.
Yeah, this is like a zoologist nightmare. That at one point the rats figure out, hey, there's some exotic meats that we could take advantage of at the local zoo. And they invade the zoo and the zookeepers, and there's one particular zookeeper, and he cares about the animals. Like there's one point he talks about there was a large snake that he laid beside as it was dying. So this
all
is
night.
Yeah, and it's he's very like I love animals kind of guy, and he just wants to give them a chance. Like he's just trying to literally is letting all the animals out to let them roam free to have a chance. And yeah, the poor guy gets eaten by a cheetah.
So what did you think about that? So in that scene, we see all of the other big cats actually jump in the fray attacking the rats. Mm-hmm. But the cheetah attacks the zookeeper and then a panther. So did you have any thoughts about why the cheetah?
I don't know if the cheetah. That's the tendency of cheetahs to just attack whatever's threatening. I'm not quite sure, but it seems kind of that there. I guess there's a kind of. I was thinking about it. I don't think I wrote this. I wrote this on my notes somewhere that it was like a pan-animal coalition. Like, let's all get together and fight the threat.
Yeah.
And yet the cheetah is like, no, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna fight you all.
But I think cheetahs are pretty solitary,
Yeah.
even in like their wild areas.
They don't want to. They tend to, like, if you go to zoos, they tend to be like, they have the whole whatever kind of paddock, or usually a pretty good area to run around in. They're usually by themselves.
Yeah, not even other cheetahs.
Yeah. But you see the problem when people don't play well in disasters, and then so. And yeah, the poor guy, he loved animals so much he was consumed by them. So
You know what? But honestly, being killed by the cheetah was a much better death.
yeah, I mean the rats here, they certainly, I guess, talking about what's like the worst animal to be eaten by. In general, your tigers and your lions, they're gonna want to take you. They get you and they grab you and they want to take you out so you're easy, so they can carry you to the den.
Unless they want to play with you first.
Unless they want to play, like a domestic cat, they want to play with you. But like a bear is apparently, if you've seen bears eat fish, they just start digging in, and you could be live as they. Again, for the most bears, it's usually bad when bears attack humans because we're like junk food to them. So it's very rare that actually happens. But when anything they eat, they just start digging in. It's definitely alive or dead or whatever. It'll just start digging in. And the rats certainly seem to be that. And I think that's what's horrifying in the book is how they attack and how relentless they are. If you throw one off, it'll come back. You'll be overwhelmed. You'll be literally dogpiled by all these rats.
There's the scene at the end where the rat has a broken back and it's still trying to drag itself to Harris, and he talks about the hate and villainy in its eyes while it's dragging itself.
Yeah.
It's almost like these rats don't feel pain.
Yeah, they don't. They just, and I guess it plays in a little bit to the end that there is some sort of king or queen that is perhaps controlling them in some way.
See, I want to know more about the zoologist that brought it over. Like, did he see these and think, oh, wow, these are really weird, I need to bring them back? Or was he doing experiments on them? Like, and I didn't understand why we kept coming back to the locksmith who used to live there. Mm-hmm. I didn't understand what that added to, or like maybe it was a once comforting place that's now become a nightmare.
Yeah. I mean, in the sense that this is Harris's childhood memories are in this neighborhood, this part of East London. He's strongly associated. This place is where he used to play. It's fallen into decrepitude, and it is it's kind of like revisiting these like childhood experiences and memories and seeing how dark they really are. He's remembering it one way as a kid, and maybe it seemed a little nicer, but that stuff has grown over. I think there's some kind of psychological dimensions to consider about this. The lock keeper, and you don't want to unlock the thing. You go into the places that you were forbidden to go into.
Yeah, because he has the whole point where he opens the door that he wasn't allowed to, and he's like, oh, it's a study. Yeah. And I was like, that was anticlimactic. It's a study. Okay.
Yeah, but then that's, he goes into the lair as, he doesn't necessarily have to, but there he goes into the lair. Yeah.
I hope Judy gave him one heck of a talking to when he got back.
Yeah, well, there's less of him to love, I guess, technically, because he lost some fingers, lost an ear, lost a chunk of his leg,
Lost a chunk of his cheek.
Yeah, I mean, he's a more than worse for wear at the end of the novel. So.
I will say, and it might be the zombie lover in me, I think for myself, the book got a lot less tense when the bites weren't as dangerous. Mm-hmm. I so much prefer one bite and you're gone. Scratching is a little too far for me. That's a little too unavoidable.
Yeah.
But one bite and you're gone, I think just raises that tension so much.
Yeah, it's kind of like they can fail, but they can miss, but you can't miss. You need to not get bitten by these things.
Even if you kill them, they still got you.
Yeah.
It might take a day, but they got you.
Yeah, I admire them for their relentlessness. They just go after you, and they find whatever hole. I think that there is a kind of, I don't know, maybe like a kind of sexual aspect to it, wherein they find an opening, they penetrate buildings, they penetrate the body. So it's this kind of these grotesque creatures violating bodies and buildings and taking over We think about it like infection, pestilence, disease, those kind of things. So yeah, it's all there, people.
And it's not heavy-handed, but it's also not subtle.
Yes. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, horror allows us to deal with these things in both a subtle and knock you over the head kind of way.
Just a quick kind of off-topic question: have you ever seen Zombievers?
I have seen part of. I tried to watch Zombievers. I know I work on another podcast called Giant Bombs, which we're hoping that we'll be starting the second season of that soon. But I do not like bad movies.
John Mayer's in it.
Yes, John. Yeah, it was clearly like John Mayer, and it was the comedian. He was red haired. Now he's. I can't remember his name all of a sudden. He's from Boston, and so.
Naturally.
But yeah, and it was clearly like an example of somebody got these two guys to do one day of work and they're just cracking jokes as garbage men. And then the toxic waste falls off and makes the Zombievers.
John also did the Zombievers theme song.
Oh,
that's him singing
nice.
it.
I feel like that was like a friend thing or something.
I think he just maybe got a little high and thought that it would be a fun thing to do for a day.
Yeah, you get a break from whatever, you want to cameo the opening, do a day of work on Zombievers.
But I bring that up because it goes back to that one bite. But how horrific would it be if you then turned into a giant rat?
Yeah,
a giant zombie rat.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's horrific enough. It's horrific enough because there's a lot of descriptions of, people not having faces. So all these fears of being consumed and eaten, very much, I think, some of the same fears of that you have with zombies.
Yeah, for sure.
And, I think, a scene where, a baby's being attacked and the mother's trying, and then, there goes the arm and things like that. So just this sense of missing appendages. A lot of these things come across as they're like battle wounds and injuries that are endured.
I also appreciate that James Herbert sets you up in the first few chapters. In the first few chapters, you have a baby getting eaten alive, a dog getting eaten alive, you have a nymphomaniac woman. Mm-hmm. So, and the rest of the book doesn't seem so extreme because he starts out so.
Yeah. It's a tone set. This first couple of chapters are definitely a tone setter for what to expect. And so if you're into if you're a gore hound, this is a good book to read. And if you get through those first chapters, you're probably ready for more that comes.
I did. Like I said, I don't normally read animal horror as an animal lover. So I wasn't sure about this one, but within 5 chapters, once I got to Mary Kelly, after that chapter, I was like, okay, I'm ready to keep reading because she's hilarious.
Yeah.
And then she dies.
It's a fascinating, and there's also I think this was his first novel, and it kind of shows because he spends all this time discussing the history and sexual history of Mary Kelly. And very hilariously, she sees nothing wrong with being promiscuous, and that's cool. She's living her life, but the fact that she at one point she learns from a girlfriend that there are things called orgasms.
Yep.
And she wants one.
So she prays to God for a man that can give her one.
Yes. It's very Catholic. She's like, pray not to get pregnant, pray not to get any diseases, and pray to have an orgasm.
She prays before and after every session.
Yeah.
But not for forgiveness.
No. And she sees nothing wrong with this, which freaks out the priest.
And she sees nothing wrong with sleeping with married men. She's like, I'm not trying to ruin their marriage. I'm just here.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting to me, especially in the 70s.
Yeah. I mean, I think, in large part by then, this is obviously before HIV AIDS, that, sexually transmitted infections were not a death sentence. That there were things that might stick around with you for the course of your life, although it reduces over time. but that you have, those things were not a death sentence. We had antibiotics. We had, things to help with those things if you had those situations come up.
Being unwed and pregnant was worse than being sick back then.
Yeah. But yeah, it was nothing that was like a death sentence. But yeah, I mean, I think and we see she finds a good man and her life is completely destroyed when she does it. Yeah, it's not I'd say this novel is very male writer 70s in that we don't have the most positive depictions or.
I don't know. I felt Mary Kelly was very positive.
Yeah.
I also loved that once her heart was shattered, that her new way of getting off was insulting the men that tried to hit on her. When I read, you have that small white maggot, I died when I realized she was talking about his penis.
Yeah.
I lost my mind.
That is an interesting way of describing a
I
sex
was
organ.
so sad when she died. I was like, no, this is a character I wanted to keep seeing.
Yeah, and it is like you spend all that, the author spends all this time building up this character just to have them die off. And it's a little, it seemed a little longer than some of the other ones. So it was like he was fascinated with the character and was, oh no, we have to kill her off now. So there's that kind of, there are characters that we follow through the story, but the one-offs seem a little overdeveloped almost. Although that's a very fun and disconcerting and interesting chapter to read about Mary Kelly.
You have the same thing, I feel like, with Henry. But even then, like the one-offs, we don't know much about the mom. We know a little bit. She accidentally got pregnant by her husband, yada, yada. But Henry and Mary were so vividly written. And I have to wonder, was James Herbert making a statement on feminism and homophobia?
Yeah.
I don't know what the statement could have been. But it seems very odd that those were the two one-offs that got like so much information.
Yeah. It's interesting that novel came out in 1974. So it was 1976 when what was called the blackmail law was rescinded. And it was not illegal to be gay in England. Back at one point, it was illegal to be gay in England.
Oscar Wilde.
Alan Turing. These were people who ended up going to jail when it was discovered that these men that were homosexual.
Alan Turing won World War II for us.
Yes.
And then committed suicide because he was found guilty of being gay and lost everything.
And so one of the things that would happen would be this thing called, what ended up happening was the blackmail law. So 90% of blackmail cases were of individual groups or individuals trying to blackmail LGBTQ people. And in terms of the law itself, obviously, oddly, although, again, being gay should not be illegal anywhere, but blackmail was a worse crime than being gay. But if you wanted to expose your blackmailer, you would expose yourself to that crime. And it was something that overwhelmed police departments. There was a wonderful movie about that problem called Victim. It's a classic movie. Get it. It's on Max. Watch it if you get the chance. And so that's very recently that's a couple of years since that had kind of come out. But obviously still seeing homosexuality as a disease, as an illness, is something that you see these kind of characters who are vividly, empathetically portrayed, but also seeing them as kind of deviants as well.
My only worry with Henry, the gay man, and the way that he was portrayed, and I mean, it's the 70s, is there is a line toward the end of his chapter where he tries to go see his lover, and the mom threatens to call the law because he's young, not because he's a man.
Yeah.
So I'm like, so is the gay man a pedophile? Yeah. Like, is that what's being argued here? Because that's pretty homophobic.
Yeah.
But it didn't fit the vibe of the rest. So I was very confused about like how old, because he kept saying very young, very young. And I was like, okay, so 18, 19. But then the mom kind of threw a wrench in that, and I was like, how old is this kid?
And it's hard. It's ambiguous, and it's hard to say. Again, that time, a lot of people live with their, people who were adults had to live with their parents just for economic reasons if they had a job. I think that's a lot. This is very similar to the country we live in right now.
I mean, Ted Nugent was also making songs like Jailbait.
Yeah. It's nothing that's ever clear, but obviously just the threat of having some sort of law enforcement or something. There's something, and his scene where he seduces the young worker, it's got some dubious consent red flags. They kind of get drunk and it seems to be consensual, but it seems like it's an opportunity and they're both intoxicated. So
also, I don't know about the power dynamic because this was a new guy to the work, and he was obviously young, and this is an older man who, up until that point, was really respected.
Yeah.
But I don't know if in the 70s we were having that conversation yet about you can't be equal to your boss, even if it's all consensual.
Yeah. And obviously just the stigma of being gay, even though it was no longer illegal in a legal sense, there was still the huge stigma of it, as, depending on what your zip code is. It's still something people deal with.
Sure. I don't know if I have anything more to say other than our last two tidbits about this being into a movie. Is there anything you want to talk about before we get into the movie?
I would say that this was a book. If you've ever seen, it's a British TV comedy, Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, and it is a parody of this horror writer named Garth Marenghi, and in the 80s, I believe, or 80s, they make a TV show based off of some of his stories, and the TV show is about the people who were on the show commenting about the episodes, which are all totally absurd, supernatural. The Garth Marenghi character, he plays a doctor, and he's just like this super awesome guy. So it plays into a lot of like this type of writing, and some of the passages in James Herbert's writing feel like jokes in Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. It's on YouTube if you can find it. It's hilarious. It has Matt Berry in it. He's one of the characters. So it's like a very short limited series, I think like 6 or 7 episodes, but if you're a horror fan and love humorous things, it's well worth your time. But we can see even by that show was done in the early mid 2000s. Can see how easily some of this becomes like absurd and ripe for parody. Where I think this time it takes it very seriously, plays it very straight. In the straight of we're taking the rat seriously. But you can see how, it was kind of what you were kind of saying. Like, I don't know if I could read 2 more books about rat infestations.
But I liked the first one.
Yeah. I think it's the most popular one, and then like I'm sure there are people like more rats, So I have the 2 books. I don't know if I'm ready to go right after them. More rats.
I am going to start reading my book for book club, and luckily it's The Very Secret Society for Irregular Witches. Mm-hmm. So very cozy and happy instead of dogs getting eaten, puppies getting. When the man is loving on the puppy, to then just sit, I was like, how could you? Yeah, I could never.
For Queen and Country. So, yeah.
And then I found the tidbit, we both have tidbits here about adaptations of this. So I found that there was a TV movie released in 2002, but it was set in New York instead of London. Mm-hmm. And it was originally supposed to come out on September 17th of 2001. Yeah. But we all know what happened 6 days before that. So because this could be looked at as a terrorist attack in a way, depending on the zoologists. They delayed it for a whole nother year because they didn't want to show New York under some kind of threat 6 days after the terrorist attack.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where the rats can embody lots of things. That fear of outsiders coming in and taking over and overwhelming, and it just hits all those. It's a novel that I think metaphorically hits all those kind of fear buttons of invasion of the body, invasion of the homeland, and things like that. Yeah, and there was I had seen I do enjoy watching YouTube videos sometimes, and there was a random one about films released in 1982, and it was a version called Deadly Eyes, which is directed by Robert Klaus, who's most known for martial arts films like directing Bloodsport and Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee. And so he had done a film adaptation. It was filmed in Canada, so this was shot in Toronto. But each of these versions tends to Americanize, North Americanize the story, which I think is it's really fundamental that London and England be the setting for this. I think it takes the class conscious. There's certainly some English flavor, kind of London urban flavor, working class flavor to the writing, which it gets lost in trying to adapt it into an American story.
That was one thing. Sometimes I had to slow down to pick up on like the British slang or just British vocabulary.
Yeah.
Luckily today we're pretty globalized, so I was already familiar with a lot of the terms.
Yeah.
But some of them kind of caught me, and I was like, what is that?
There's also this idealization. There's one point where they they have a weekend and go to see Judy's aunt, and they're out in the country, and it has that kind of the rural space is this pleasant, quiet, isolated place. Although they go to Stratford, and he's all mad because it's all touristy because that's where William Shakespeare was born and grew up. But it is this kind. It is a space that's idealized as compared to the urban area where things are gathered and clustered and people are there and things. Talking about like these big high rises where they put a lot of kind of working class people in, and how isolating that is, but also how claustrophobic and overwhelming. So there's a lot going on tonally, and there's a lot going on in terms of how the way people were living and the situations we're living were kind of untenable and unpleasant and very susceptible to rat attacks.
For sure. All right. Any last words on the rats?
If you like violence, if you like horror, and you like that visceral kind of horror, I think The Rats is a good read. It's a little under 200 pages, so it's a pretty quick read. It's one that has a pretty relentless momentum, so it's something you could probably read in a few days, and if you're an ambitious reader, do it in a day. But if you want to check out some good horror, The Rats.
If you don't like what you're reading by chapter 5, stop.
Yeah.
It's not going to get any different. It's just going to amp up.
More. You think, we can't be any worse than that, and then it gets worse. So,
much worse.
And then apparently there are 2 more books of it just getting worse and worse. So.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Our next episode will be on Man-Made Monsters by Andrea Rogers. So look out for that one, or maybe read it, just in case we do give spoilers.
Take care and happy reading.